Hi, everyone. Welcome today. We're so glad you are here. My name is Sarah McAllister. I am the Senior Associate Director here for the Office of Alumni Career and Professional Development. And we have Nicole Bush here, who is our Senior Director for our office as well. Nicole will be all things tech today. So if you have any technical issues, feel free to just direct message her. The session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel later. And Nicole will put that in the chat so you can access that. With that, I am so excited to hand it over to Tara Quinn. Nicole and I met her a couple months ago, and I've been looking forward to this session since we met. I know that I'm going to be taking notes. This is a topic that we can all just learn a lot from. So Tara, I'm going to hand it over to you, introduce yourself, and then take us away. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted. For those of you who haven't had a chance to meet me before, my name is Tara Quinn. I am an executive and organizational coach, now based back out of New Orleans. So I'm really glad to be back here in my home uptown near Tulane. And I've been really delighted the last few months to start getting involved a little bit with Tulane and giving back. So kind of marrying those two important parts of my life has been great. And as we head into the holidays, one of the things that I was discussing with Sarah and Nicole is essentially, how do we take good care of ourselves during this incredibly busy time of year? And I think some of you might have seen in the description of this workshop that the holidays can be wonderful. They can be joyous and a time of light and love and gathering. And they can also be incredibly overwhelming and stressful. So how do we deal with that? And especially this year when we're perhaps a little bit out of practice. We have been putting out an incredible amount of energy the last few years, dealing with an incredible amount of uncertainty. So we've been navigating a lot. And what I've been hearing from a lot of my clients is I'm this weird mix of like Will Ferrell elf, like really wanting to get back into it. And also, bah humbug, let me just stay at home. I don't know if I have the energy. So if you're feeling that mix, if you're feeling both excited and also a little bit of trepidation, we're going to start with a little bit of good news for you. And let me see if I can actually work. Yeah, there we go. You're not alone. This is just a small handful of the memes that are cropping up this time of year. And as you can see, even if you do not have any spiritual or religious connection to this season, you're still going to have to deal with it in a certain way. So hopefully you can have a little bit of laughter around this. One of the reasons I incorporate a little bit of humor into my presentations is, as we'll see later, humor is actually a key component for the support of neuroplasticity, which is not to say that we don't take growth and evolution and health and wellness seriously. It's just to say that if we can hold it with a little bit of compassion and a little bit of levity, that can go a long way. So on that note, to give you an idea of what you're going to be experiencing today, this is the high-level overview. And the first thing that we'll look at is mindfulness in a hurry. And the bottom line is, if you don't have a tool that you can reach for quickly and easily, it's hard to recenter. So we're going to actually give you one. Then understanding stress is really important. A lot of times, like I said, I am uptown now, so you might hear a train every now and then. Sometimes you'll hear them from campus too. But understanding what stress is, being able to, rather than blame yourself for being overwhelmed, there it is. I like to make up that train is supporting you all and throwing that horn or in support of you. It's backing up this message. Understanding what stress is means that rather than saying, I'm overwhelmed, I'm somehow failing, you can say, all right, what is going on in my current situation where my neurochemistry isn't where I need it to be? I'm getting flooded, and then address it. You're not doing anything wrong. It's just that you haven't intervened quite yet on your own behalf. So we'll look at that. Then we're actually going to do a battery check. We're going to do a bit of an energy audit so you can check in with yourself. We're each different, and this fluctuates from day to day. So where are you now, and what would you like to do about it? Then we look at that topic of feed yourself first. How do you make sure that you have a wellness pantry? And essentially that's just, a nice metaphor for, do you have practices, rituals, supportive thought processes? Essentially, what do you reach for when you need to replenish? and making sure that you have enough of them that you know that given whatever time frame you have something that will fit. And then last but not least, we look at what now? What kind of tools can we equip you with? And we'll give you a few that will help you manage your stress and really reclaim your sanity throughout the rest of this year and through next. Some of these tools we will actually walk through together so you can experience it as a participant. And some of them, what we will do is actually just give you a high level overview so that you can choose some of the ones that fit most or really resonate with you and do a little bit more research, dive into those as you move forward. So like I said, the first one that we're going to do is called the 3-center check-in. So we've been hearing a lot in the last several years about mindfulness and what does that mean? So I'm going to guide you through a really quick 90-second ritual that will help you check in and be mindful with 3 different centers of intelligence. And those are going to be the head, the heart, and the body. Essentially, our intellectual wisdom and knowledge, our emotional intelligence and knowledge, and our somatic intelligence and knowledge. And what we mean by that is what we're sensing in our body. And you'll often hear people say, oh, I could just sense it. And that's what that means. The emotional and especially the somatic are not always areas of intelligence that are focused on very much in traditional Western corporate or academic culture. But a lot of times, part of what can stress us out, quote unquote, is that we're ignoring cues from those places. So we want to just bring them into the conversation. It's not to say that our brains aren't incredibly important and that our intellect isn't a huge driver for us and or a huge well of wisdom, but we want to introduce the other two as well. So what we're going to do is sit and recognize that self-awareness comes from how we direct our attention. It determines what we notice and allows us to gain new insights so that we can make intentional choices. So what you're going to do right now is take a moment, close your eyes if you feel comfortable, and you can either sit comfortably in your chair, or if you'd like, you can recline somewhere nearby and give yourself just a minute and a half. And focusing first on your head, on that place of intelligence, just ask yourself, what am I aware of in my mind? What am I thinking? What stories might be floating around in there? Are there any images? Am I remembering, planning, worrying? Essentially, what is floating around up there in your mind? And just put a little pin in that. When you're ready, bring your awareness just a little bit down further to your heart. And just check in there. And this is where a lot of your emotional wisdom will live. And just give yourself a second to ask, what am I aware of in my heart? What's in that emotional field? What am I feeling? For a lot of us, it might feel strange to check in on this place. Maybe it's feeling a little neglected. We might not have had time for this space the last few years. Ask yourself, how would I describe my mood or attitude? Is there anxiety, perhaps some disappointment or anticipation, maybe warmth or delight? And then lastly, when you're ready, bring your attention to what you're sensing, to that place of body knowledge, body wisdom, somatic intelligence. And ask yourself, what am I aware of in my body? What sensations are predominant for me right now? Does my body feel heavy and tired? Maybe open, relaxed? Is there a tension or ease? Any pulsing, tingling, or aching? Or perhaps just a sense of peace and stillness? And then when you're ready, just bring your self back to center, back into the room. And notice, if you will, what may have shifted over the past minute, minute and a half. And hopefully the intention of this is that even if your situation hasn't changed, even if you've still got things pulling at your attention, having some of these stressors, hopefully your relationship to that has shifted a bit because you gave yourself a moment to check in. And this is really one of those tools that I say can be an accordion. You can do it in 30 seconds or less. You can give this 30 minutes if you have it. But it's a tool that can start out as low-hanging fruit, something you can pull and use at any point during the day. I've had clients set alarms on their phone, maybe even just 3 times a day. Hey, how am I doing? I have another client that does it while they commute. So you can use this one. Think on it. Was it useful for you? And where might you incorporate this? And just again, an idea of why we do this. It gives you a chance to check in with 3 different places where we hold wisdom and also stress. So if anyone has ever been to a massage therapist and had them say, oof, this is in your shoulders, guess what? It's because that's what we decided was a storage area for all the stuff we didn't want to be aware of. So this helps to begin nipping some of that in the bud. And it also helps you maintain a bit of your sanity. So when you get around whatever your triggers are this holiday season, whether it's crowded shopping, deadlines, a certain family member or 2, whatever it is that triggers you, rather than letting the situation get you, what's going on in my mind, what's in my heart, and what's in my body. This is just a jumping off point, but we'll discuss how you use some of that awareness in just a minute. And to give you an idea of what mindfulness is, because that's been a big buzzword recently, and it's hard to understand exactly what we're talking about without a little bit of a high-level explanation. And so for that, we're going to turn to Dan Harris, who was a national correspondent, incredibly demanding job. And you can Google him. His name is Dan Harris, just like it sounds, DanHarris. And he wrote an incredible book about mindfulness and meditation called 10% Happier. And the reason why he went on this journey to discover mindfulness for himself is because he actually experienced a panic attack, a rather severe one, on camera. And I really admire him for being as transparent about it as he was, because it's helped a lot of people since. So this is an explanation from him about why mindfulness is important. It's a less than 3-minute video. It gives you a much better explanation than I could with cute animals. So I'll let you watch this and then we'll debrief just a little bit.
Hey, Tara, we're having an issue. We can't hear the sound from the video.
I'm sorry, say again, they're not.
The sound from the video isn't coming through.
Okay, well, let me do this. So if you're not hearing the video, essentially what he's talking about is establishing a buffer between stimulus and response, and actually reframing from reaction to response. So a lot of times what we're doing in the day is just going through, having a stimulus come at us and just reacting. And he's talking about, and it doesn't have to be a long pause, but just that beat that we take, that breath that we take between the stimulus and the way that we then mindfully respond to it. Does it happen all the time? No, but it's an ideal. And it tends to avoid further drama or further conflict, which then just leads to further stress. So, what Dan Harris talks about here is that he actually sees mindfulness as the next public health revolution. And he has a funny phrase in this particular presentation where he says, 40 years ago, if you told someone that you were going to go running, they'd say, "Who's chasing you? Why? Why would you do this?" But now the scientists have swooped in, they did the research and said, yeah, actually, aerobic activity is good for us. We should be running. And a lot of people run, and we feel bad when we don't go to the gym. So he talks about meditation and mindfulness as essentially a no-brainer that will eventually be like brushing our teeth. We will think about it just the same way we think about fitness and personal hygiene and wellness. So that said, it doesn't have to be a mystery and it doesn't have to be complicated. So essentially, that's what he's talking about here, is that mindfulness, which can be achieved through meditation, is a superpower because what it gives us is the ability to respond instead of react. And he actually says in this video, it is not going to render your life a nonstop parade of rainbows and unicorns, but it will get you closer. So I really apologize that this particular video did not function correctly on the Zoom, but I am happy to send the link to Sarah and Nicole and then send it out to you because it really is a really rich 3 minutes. It's both serious about the science and holds it with humor. So we love that. But that's essentially what he's saying, is that mindfulness is that superpower that can save you from flipping out at someone who cut you off in traffic, even if maybe they deserve it. And on that note, in order to really handle our stress well, one of the first things that we can do is understand what we are talking about when we speak about stress. And the first thing to know is, what are we talking about? What do we mean by stress? And here's the definition. Stress is simply the body's response to changes that create taxing demands, which means that not all stress is inherently bad or negative. There are actually two different types. And one of them we really need. Distress, we do not. Eustress is actually virtuous. Eustress, and we're going to talk about what this looks like, is when we are in a beautiful balance, where we have the right balance of dopamine and norepinephrine. You'll hear people refer to this as being in the zone, when work becomes effortless, when you're happy without necessarily even realizing it. We actually need this. Do you want your surgeon to be in distress? Absolutely not. Do you want them to be a little bit stressed? Yeah. You want them to be focused and on their game when they're making an incision. You want them not to choose the wrong knee. You know what I'm saying? So you do want, and we want, to have a certain amount of stress in our day. For example, I got some dopamine and norepinephrine going right now. And thank goodness. You wouldn't want to deal with me if I didn't. But we want to look at tipping over into distress. That's when it becomes detrimental, really, to our health and also to our performance. So what does that look like? How do we keep ourselves in the eustress, the upright, in the zone performance space, and not drowning or losing our minds? This is what this really looks like. We're looking for a Goldilocks place on a curve. And here we're looking at mindfulness, performance, and our prefrontal cortex, because that is what goes offline when we get flooded. So the Goldilocks of your brain is your prefrontal cortex. And when we can get that in the right balance, we have access to high-level functioning. When it's offline, it goes away. So when you notice through mindfulness that you have foggy thinking, poor impulse control, oh, I almost shouted at that, okay. Poor decision-making, poor memory. Why can't I recall what I did yesterday? I had a client literally call me and be like, I'm losing it. I forgot what I did yesterday afternoon. We get a lack of empathy, or we become very black and white, polarized in our thinking. But when we have that right balance, we have goal direction. We can delay gratification when appropriate. We can make, form, and retrieve those memories. We can make informed decisions, have empathy and understanding for what others are saying, and also to understand abstract concepts instead of just that black and white, one or the other thinking. So when we have too much stress and stimulation, too much dopamine, too much norepinephrine, it looks very similar to when we have too little. So one thing to think about is, am I really flooded or am I maybe bored? And I saw a little bit of both during the pandemic. I had one client who literally said, I am so bored from being home. I want to get out and run. I want to be given projects. I want to be around my people. So for him, he analyzed that he was dealing with too little stress, too little stimulation. A lot of us have been on the other end dealing with too much because the past 3 years have given an incredible amount of demand, which has required a lot of cognitive load. So here's another way to think about this is that our
Hey,
optimal.
Tara, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I think the PowerPoint might be frozen.
That's okay. Did it just go forward to another slide?
It did not. It's on the Your Brain Stress and Wellness slide.
Oh, really? Oh gosh. Okay. So it did not go to this one.
Okay, now it's on neuroscience of performance, understanding stress. Okay, thanks.
So this is what I was saying about neuroscience of performance, understanding stress. It's just the body's response to changes that are creating taxing demands. So this was just a little slide for that. This is showing that distress, I'm so sorry, I thought y'all were seeing these as I was going through. Distress is not the same as eustress. So we have here some people who really are in that place of the zone. They are in stress, but it's eustress, it's performance. Over on the left, you're seeing where people get into distress. And that is what we want to avoid. So like I was saying, what we want to find is this Goldilocks place on a curve. And this is what we were talking about. Can you see this now? This Goldilocks of the brain, prefrontal, good. This is where you can see when you get that just right, that dopamine and norepinephrine imbalance, we have goal direction and delay gratification. We have access to our prefrontal cortex and high level functioning. When we have too much stress, too much stimulation, or even too little, that is when we get foggy thinking. We lose memories, we lose empathy, and we're not able to really think abstractly. We get really linear in thinking. And so, again, I see people get into these places and take it as a failing of their own, as some type of personal failing, but it's really not. The thing that's important to understand is that it is just your body going offline a little bit. How do we address this? Here's another way to, can you see the next slide? Perfect. We'll just double check every time we advance. So this shows again, optimal performance. And this particular chart says to aim to keep employees at this performance level. Really, we want to keep ourselves. It's not about controlling employees. This is about our own personal wellness. We have to dip back into calm at times, and we'll talk about that green zone strategy in just a moment. But on the whole, we really want to keep ourselves, for the most part, energized, focused, and in a place where work feels effortless. When we begin to notice fatigue, exhaustion, health things come up, and or, God forbid, breakdown and burnout, that's a heads up to us. And we notice that through mindfulness. That's a heads up to dip back into the places that help us renew and recharge. So we're going to talk about that. The next thing that we'll look at, and can you see this next slide? Excellent. All right, is cultivating green zone strategies. And give me one moment, because as we were chatting about this, I lost that. It fell off my table right here. So as in life, always an adventure, and sometimes you drop your notes. Essentially, what we're going to be looking at here is, in order to keep ourselves in those places that are more green, what does that look like? What is this green zone? What do we mean? And essentially what it is staying in a place where we are really well balanced from a neurocognitive and chemical place. This responsive green zone, this is what Dan Harris was talking about. This is where, when we have taxing stimuli, we can respond rather than react. This is home base for our brain and our body. But in the modern world, we do not spend enough time here. In this state, we activate our parasympathetic nervous system. This is home to the relaxation response. This is also the state in which our bodies repair and refuel themselves. It's critical. It's not an option. Our frontal lobes are online and fully functioning, allowing us to see and think clearly and creatively, allowing us to respond appropriately to given situations. In this state, we are relaxed, open, resilient, and able to see with clarity and objectivity. And except for instances of emergency, it is best to try to spend the majority of our time in the green zone. There are obvious exceptions. If we are at a restaurant and someone is having a medical emergency, we should respond to that. We should be calling 911. We should be seeing who in the room is best suited and capable of offering care. But that's an exception. A lot of time has been spent over the last few years in these other zones, yellow, orange, or let's be honest, even red. And we have experiences on a daily basis that begin to move us out of that green zone into yellow and then orange and red. The red zone is our most reactive mode. It's very difficult to respond from here. It revs up and activates our sympathetic nervous system, home to that fight, flight, or freeze. We are not our best selves here. The body will release stress hormones like cortisol. This starts to course through the bloodstream and actually increases emotions, including fear, anxiety, irritation, impatience, and at times even aggression. This is where your frontal lobe goes offline. It's literally your phone shutting down. And then the amygdala powers up. So our focus of attention narrows. A lot of times people in this zone will be talking about having tunnel vision or even forgetting where they are. And except for during emergencies, this is not at all a helpful or sustainable state to be even spending any time in. So let's look at how we get ourselves out of it. Cultivating green zone strategies includes what we call observe, relax, reset, rest and recover, repeat, 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 and center. And here's what we mean by that. And I'm just going to give a quick overview with this one because I know we lost a little bit of time. And my apologies again for the presentation not advancing. But here, just to know what observe and all of these mean, observe means to become familiar with your stress signals. So again, this is where mindfulness kicks in. Observing what does trigger us. When you are feeling stressed or pressured, what typically happens for you? Noticing things internally and externally. What typical thoughts, feelings, and sensations are a clue? So again, head, heart, and body. What gives you clues that you're feeling stressed or pressured? From external, observe what circumstances, could it be people, situations, environments, time frames, time of day? Where do you tend to get triggered or stressed? That's observe. Relax is to activate the relaxation response in your nervous system to reset your body and brain. Take at least 3 long exhales, twice as long as an inhale, and notice your system start to relax and reset, and continue until you feel the relaxation response kick in. That's just one option. I have other clients that will do a guided meditation, perhaps through an app like Calm. So there's a few different ways to handle relax, but essentially what it is short-circuiting that response in that red zone. Reset means to reset your brain by engaging in activities that will bring your frontal lobe back online. A few examples are do an easy note task. So for example, rewrite a list of notes from a meeting, sort the mail, drive or walk a familiar route, or even brush your teeth. Do an easy task. Move your body, getting outdoors, brisk walking, stretching, walking up and down stairs, connecting with others. If you're really stressed out, could you call a friend for a few minutes? Could you even go to the corner store and buy yourself a beverage and have a pleasant chat while you're there? Seeking support and help from others, moving away from trying to tackle the stressor immediately and or alone. And lastly, are also simplify, breaking larger tasks into smaller tasks, slowing your pace down, shorten your to-do list, and eliminate or postpone completely non-essential tasks. We often find ourselves getting into an incredible amount of stress only to realize this isn't even due for a month. Why? Because it gives us an outlet for our stress. We often choose something that really isn't essential immediately. Rest and Recover talks about taking good care of ourselves so that we are resourced and resilient to handle the high pace and high volume of our modern work environment. Getting enough sleep, eating well, and exercising. It's really some of those basic building blocks of wellness. And repeat, repeat, repeat. And what this really points to is that it's okay, that it's not possible to stay in the green zone all of the time. The demands that we face, especially in today's environment, on an ongoing basis, will continue to knock us off balance throughout our days, weeks, and years. The goal is not to avoid being off balance at all, but to build our capacity for dealing with it when we are. To return to a more relaxed, open, balanced state each time we notice through mindfulness that we've moved towards that red zone. This requires continuous monitoring of our inner state and continuous practice with green zone strategies that work best for us. So it'll take a little bit of trial and error to see what really helps you. The more we practice, the easier and faster our minds, hearts, and bodies can return to that state of equilibrium. And lastly, center. When we are under stress, we move to reactivity. Our habitual defense posture of fight, flight, freeze, or flee. We can learn to train the body to move from reactivity to center, a posture that allows us to meet the situation with ease, dignity, and grace. And that can look like a few different things. You can practice a dignified posture. Adjust yourself to sit upright. A lot of times when we are under stress, I once heard a comedian say, there's something about stress where we suddenly feel like everything we need to protect is in our neck. We get all tight and the shoulders come up. So I'll notice this on Zoom sometimes, is that when there's conflict or people are stressed, you stop seeing people's necks and they start turtling it up. So maintaining a dignified posture, give yourself a minute. Doing a deep exhale breath like we talked about, maybe balancing, releasing tension. And lastly, asking, what would it be like if there was a little more fill in the blank here? It could be humor, grace, whatever it is that you need a little bit more of, what might that look like? So that is what we're talking about when we say cultivating green zone strategies. And we'll speak specifically about what those might look like for you. Can you see this next slide right now? Stress management sequence. Excellent. This is one other tool that we'll go through really quickly. And do feel free to take some notes as we go along, and or if anyone would like to chat with me after this, we absolutely can. What we're talking about with stress management sequence, this is another tool for getting yourself back to that green zone. And essentially it's name, control, values, perspective, presence. And these are in increasing order of effectiveness, ways to help short circuit and deal with stress. The first is just to name it. A lot of times we embody that stress. We don't take a beat to be mindful about what's going on, and we can't name it. And that can help immensely, even just being able to pull out that thread and say, I'm really nervous about that meeting next week. I don't feel prepared. Or, oh, I'm dreading this fill in the blank. Or, oh, I'm guilting myself because I slept through the gym this morning. Whatever it is, name it. How are you really feeling? Then controlling the environment. Is there something that you might be able to adjust or shift to address it? If what you're stressed about is that meeting next week, what can be done about that to begin turning down the volume? Also really important, what values are being dishonored that might be contributing to the stress? And what are you trying to honor through your reaction? I had a client recently who was having a really red zone reaction to a situation at work. And when she was able to pause and give herself a moment to focus on them, she realized that what was truly triggering her was the disrespect that was being shown by a colleague towards her team. Could she be reactive about it? No, that wouldn't have been an appropriate way to handle it. But it was okay that she was triggered by the behavior. It showed that her values weren't being honored. And what can be done about that? Exploring another perspective. Is there another way of looking at this? Is there a high level of this? One of the best ways to capture this is when we ask coaching clients, is it going to matter in a year? We often stress about the minutia because it feels close at hand. And it might matter today, but will it matter in a week or a month or a year or two? If the answer is no, that gives us a bit of data. Maybe I can stress a little less about this. And lastly, being present and mindful. This is that mindfulness. The 3-center check-in is a great way of getting there. Being present and mindful to how you're feeling right here and right now. Even just breathing and noticing what's happening in your body short circuits that amygdala. and helps you get back to your prefrontal cortex. So we're going to talk about one participatory tool that we're actually going to go through together. And what you're going to want is just a piece of paper and a writing tool, pen or pencil, whatever works for you, or you could even type this up if you want. But what you're going to do is be led through a quick audit to check in on your energy and where you are today. So just be really honest with yourself. What we're going to do is go through 4 different categories of energy: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And there will be just a few questions in each category. And if you would respond yes to that particular inquiry, just give yourself a check and then we will total them up. So we're going to start with physical. So for each of these statements that you would agree with, give yourself a little check mark. So physical energy first. Inquiry number 1, I do not regularly get at least 7 or 8 hours of sleep, or I often wake up feeling tired. If that's true for you, go ahead and give yourself a check. Number 2 is I frequently skip breakfast, or I settle for something that isn't particularly healthy. And if that one is true for you, give yourself a check. Number 3, I don't regularly do cardiovascular training at least 3 times a week, or strength training at least twice per week. And so if that's true, go ahead and give yourself a check. Next inquiry, I don't take regular breaks during the day to renew and recharge. And lastly, I often eat lunch at my desk, if I eat lunch at all. So you can total up what you got in that category. And then for emotional, there will be 5 questions here as well. Number 1, I frequently find myself feeling irritable, impatient, or anxious at work, especially when demand is high. If that's true for you, give yourself a check. Next one, I don't have enough time with my family and loved ones. And when I'm with them, I'm not always really with them and present. If that's true, give yourself a check. Number 8, I take too little time for the activities that I most deeply enjoy. If that's true, give yourself a check. I rarely stop to express my appreciation to others or to savor and celebrate my accomplishments and blessings. If that's true for you, give yourself a check. And 10, I often feel that my life is just a relentless set of demands I'm expected to meet and tasks I have to complete. If that's true, give yourself a check. So that's the emotional category. So total up what you're seeing in that category for yourself. And then the next category will be mental energy. So the first one is I have difficulty focusing on one thing at a time, and I'm easily distracted during the day, especially by email. I think a lot of us can relate to that email one. Next one, I spend much of my time reacting to immediate demands rather than focusing on activities and longer-term value and longer-term value and leverage. Next one, I don't take enough time for reflection, strategizing, and thinking creatively. 14, or next one, I rarely have any time when my mind is quiet and free of thoughts. And last one, I often work on evenings and weekends or I rarely take an email-free vacation. So if any of those are true, make sure you total them up, and that will be your score for emotional. And last but not least, spiritual. And this does not necessarily mean religious. This can just be your personal definition of spirituality. And the first inquiry is, I don't feel passionately committed to what I do. Next one is, I spend too little time at work doing what I do best and enjoy most. Next one, there are significant gaps between what I say is important in my life and how I actually live. My decisions at work are more often influenced by external demands than by a strong, clear sense of my own purpose. And last but not least, I do not invest enough time and energy in making a positive difference to others or the world. So take a moment to total up what you got for spiritual. And then when you're done, total up all 4 of those categories to get your overall score. Now, this tool comes to us from a group out of New York called the Energy Project. And they work with a lot of individuals and organizations around this particular idea of energy and what that really means. And a lot of us have been struggling in the last few years to maintain that. We've been feeling really burned out. So if you look at your overall score, all this is a tool to give you a snapshot. People might move immediately into judgment about their score, but really all this is to give you an idea of where you stand. And the best score is an honest score. And ideally, as you move forward, a score that's an improvement upon what you've been dealing with in the past. So looking at what you have, this is the way the Energy Project would categorize scores. And again, it's just their overarching, so take it as you will. They claim that if you have below 5, you're fully energized. You're doing really well. If you have 5 to 8, you're moderately energized. 9 to 12, somewhat. 13 to 16, they would call fading. And 17 to 20 is what they would call burned out. Now, again, this is a guide, and you also have to look at how you're feeling about your responses. There are times in your life and or even during the year where you're okay sacrificing some of these in order for others to be honored. But over the long term, if you are checking off a lot of these, that indicates that there's an incredible cognitive load that you're handling and not enough time is being spent on replenishment. So that's just something to take. And again, I know we only have a few more minutes here, so I'm going to walk you through how do you begin to address, in addition to green zone strategies, some other tools to deal with your energy audit. So now that you have that information, what are you going to do with it? And again, if your score is really high, that's not necessarily a negative. It's just info, and we're going to look at it. If it's low, great. It means that you're doing something right. How could it be even better? How could you polish even further? So now we're going to decide what you want to do about it. So when you're building effective energy renewal rituals, this is just information I'm going to give to you, and you can work with this after today's workshop, is that essentially we want to look at portion control. If you try and overhaul everything, it's almost like trying to renovate every room in a house while you're still living in it. If you're saying like, ooh, well, I'm going to go to yoga 7 days a week and I'm going to eat macrobiotic food every day, you want to kind of try to target 1 or 2 behaviors at a time and be really highly precise and specific. And there's a reason for this, because what you're trying to do is develop rituals. And a great example of a ritual is brushing our teeth. We barely think about it. We do it multiple times per day, and it's not even conscious. But whether you can remember it or not, there was a time when someone, a parent, a loved one, a guardian, had to stand there with you and be like, yes, you have to brush every tooth. You got to do it for 10 minutes, for 2 minutes. Like someone had to stand there with you and help you establish that ritual. We kind of need to be that way with ourselves as we're starting new virtuous cycle habits. We do need to be like, yep, I'm going to go to the gym Monday and Thursday. I'm going to do it between 7 and 9 a.m. Like we really have to get specific, because if we say, I'll work out this week, no, you won't. But if you do that portion control, if you define success and measure progress Monday and Thursday, great. Sharing to increase accountability is a huge one, because when we say I'll go to the gym, maybe. When we say I'll meet my friend at that class, we have accountability. When we pay a trainer, oof, even more. So looking at how do I share these goals to increase my own accountability, use our wonderful weirdness as human beings to serve ourselves. We're more accountable to others than we are to ourselves. Why? Let's not question it. Let's just use it for good. And then also expect and plan for resistance or setbacks. If Monday doesn't happen, Tuesday will be my backup day. So looking at when you're designing your rituals, these are keys to make them sticky, to set yourself up for success so that this becomes a virtuous cycle. And you know that it's truly locked in and ritualized when days when you don't honor it or weeks when you don't honor it feel strange. So the way to think about this is, if you're a professional athlete, your rituals are really defined. You have time for rest, But the days when you're not performing feel a little bit strange. You practice more days than not. So that's something to think about. And as you are designing rituals, a few other things to think about building into them is the keys and enhancers for neuroplasticity. And what we're talking about here is essentially ways to structure our days that make it more likely that we will stick with virtuous habits that serve us. Exercise and physical movement, sleep and rest, nutrition, novelty, and focus and attention. But here are really important enhancers: relationships and community, humor and play. Reason why we had a few memes at the top of this. If we take it incredibly seriously, it makes it hard to learn. Children are allowed this, but we forget as adults. Mistakes and course correction are to be expected and not something that leads us to beat ourselves up. Mistakes can actually be the things that finally make it click. My joke on this one was there were a couple times when I first moved to a new city that I was so engrossed in my book that I missed my bus stop twice. And I had to miss it twice to finally remember, okay, when we pass this street, I need to pay attention. So that mistake, was it super fun walking home in the cold? Not particularly, but stopped me from doing it again. And lastly, multisensory input. If it can be audio and visual and or experiential, that will lock in learning and rituals faster than things that are less so. Renewal on your schedule. This is what I mean when I talk about stocking a pantry. And just to acknowledge, I know we're going a tiny bit over just so you have this really quick, and then we'll dive right into Q&A. When you're thinking about things that truly nourish and recharge you, it can be hard to figure out what can I do with 30 seconds. But if you can start with, what would I do if I had a week or a long weekend? It can lead us to what could I do in 30 seconds? And here's a couple examples of that. One of my clients said, well, if I had an hour, I'd practice guitar, but I don't always have an hour. So what he did for himself was say, okay, even if I've only got 5 minutes, I'm going to pick a part of a piece I'm working on that I've been avoiding, something I don't want to work on. It's harder and I'm tripping over it. And for 5 minutes, that's my focus. And then maybe later in the day, I get 30 minutes or 45 minutes, but at least every day I practice and I'm tackling the stuff I've been avoiding. That was his way of stocking his pantry with something that took 5 minutes. For 30 seconds, that could be something like a 3-center check-in or another thing that you have identified that nourishes you. I've had clients that will say, I will draw the blinds and close my door and do a crazy dance party in my living room or my office when I need to. You know, decide if your office culture will allow for you to invite a colleague in, maybe, maybe not. But what can you do in just a few minutes to truly reset? And lastly, think about if there's a layer of what truly nourishes you. And I stumbled across this one as a joke, but one of the things that truly, truly brings me back to center is scuba diving. But for obvious reasons, it's not something I can do regularly right now. But as kind of a joke, I found out that a layer that nourishes me, and I can access it every day if I choose to, is that actually I will sometimes listen to white noise when I'm working. And it can be rainfall in the forest or waves on the ocean. But one time I just got curious and I went to YouTube, and it turns out that some delightfully quirky genius has put 12 hours of scuba noise on YouTube. And I thought, let's see how this goes. And I just, clicked play and put my headphones on. And I can't tell you, it was like immediate. Just hearing the sound of kind of the gurgling water and that, that regulator breathing, that quiet, calm breathing. And it just, my heart went, oh, and my brain let go. So that's a layer. Did I get to go scuba diving? Nope, not even close. But that audio information was enough. So think about, is there a layer of what brings you joy? And trust me, there's another weirdo out there just like you on the internet that probably already prepared it for you. So either a snippet or a layer. And start thinking about each one of these. If I've got 30 seconds, what do I reach for? Ooh, I've got an hour. What do I reach for? Oh, I got a day off. What am I doing with it? So that keeps us from analysis paralysis. And as we build those muscles, we pull off the shelf even more quickly. Lastly, just a few tools that I'm going to give you that you can research further. How are we going to maintain our sanity through this holiday season? We've figured out how to nourish ourselves. We've looked at renewal rituals. Here are a few more things to look into. that can help us when relating to others. Rumble language is essentially more enlightened language for dealing with conflict, which is inevitable. And a lot of times, especially when we're reactive, we go from really responsive to, hey, you did this, and blaming. We want someone to blame because it gives control over what is often a non-controllable situation. So rumble language gives us more constructive, compassionate, and useful language to use. And we can sometimes use it with ourselves. I can't tell you how many times I've been stressed out and gone, what story am I making up? What do I need to learn more on? So I've used this even with me. Another one is the idea of coin method feedback. A lot of times when we need to give feedback to someone, it's easy to tip into it becoming ad hominem feedback because we're not using the circumstances, observations about the circumstances, communicating the impact of that person's behavior, and discussing desired next steps. So coin method feedback, do a little research into this, has changed my life in so many ways. And I've seen it be very, very useful for clients. So an example here would be, Bob is always 20 minutes late to meetings. We can make up a lot about that. We can make up a lot of assumptions about why that's happening. But rather than sitting down with him and being like, look, Bob, we think you're an inconsiderate jerk who doesn't care about anyone else but himself in these meetings. It's what we have noticed is that you're tardy on a regular basis. Here's how that's impacting the team. Let's design some next steps together. It's a completely different conversation. And last but not least, one of the things that we need so much, especially during the holidays, is care, nourishing, renewal. And so if you look into the research around what it was first called love languages and discussed in the context of marriage and relational counseling, has actually gone mainstream into the workplace, but we're calling it appreciation or care languages. We might not love all of our colleagues, but we do want to respect and care for and appreciate them. And we actually need to in order to work well as teams. So think about and do a little more research into this for yourself. There are assessments you can do online. What are your love languages? And there are 5. Words of affirmation, acts of service, giving and or receiving of gifts, quality time, and physical touch. Obviously, in workplace settings, we do need to be judicious and cautious with physical touch. But every now and then you get that fist bump from a colleague and you're like, I did do a good job. Or you get that email that's just like, hey, killed it on that presentation. Well done. Depending on who you are, that email could mean so much more than even a raise. Or acts of service. That colleague, when you're really burned out, who pokes their head in and goes, hey, I took care of that thing for you. And gosh, you just want to give them a kidney because they saved you. So that's what we're really looking at, is understanding your love languages, your appreciation languages, both with family, friends, and colleagues during this season. And also getting curious about what might others' languages be. It can make us more effective in relationships. So lastly, I just want to leave you with this. A lot of this is the basics that we have let fall by the wayside during the last few years. So that idea of drink water and get sun. We are organic beings. We don't often allow ourselves to be. So it's a joke, but true. We are basically houseplants with complicated emotions. And also, I don't know anyone who would let that happen to their phone, but we all often let it happen to ourselves. So the last thing I will say is that if anyone would like to dive deeper, I know we've covered a lot of ground today. And again, my apologies sincerely for the advancement of the slide. So if anyone would like to dive a little deeper on this, I would be delighted to offer you a complimentary consultation. We can talk about what was most interesting to you today and where you'd like to take it further. But first, I'd love to open it up to the floor and hear what everyone has for questions.
Tara, thank you so much. One question that came through is, so much of today's presentation was on the individual, which is super important. Have you seen any example, or do you have any examples of how some of these have been implemented throughout an entire office, or maybe somebody who's in a supervisory position that wants to share this?
Yes, absolutely. So some of these are incredibly useful, even in the workplace. I have had actually each and every one of these tools have been used in one of the things that's one of my major projects that is often offered over 10 months. But some of these managerial tools, you can get your team to do the energy audit. I do know some leaders who've sat down. It's amazing when hard science can help us with ourselves and with others. So even knowing where everybody's at on an energy audit, sitting down and discussing what does renew us, what works for us, having a conversation with colleagues about like, what are your appreciation languages? And it's great when colleagues can say, you know what, it's not that your appreciative email didn't matter, but like, where's the help I needed? Requested it 6 months ago. So things like that. Using these tools, you can do an energy audit, have a nice, open, honest conversation about how can I support you best? Does my email follow in deadlines? Maybe appreciation isn't right. It could be something as simple as let's go grab lunch. It's on me. And just having some quality time together and letting them know. So all of these tools are actually incredibly applicable to the workplace. Coin method feedback is a huge one. When I do managerial training, especially for new managers, no one tells us how to give feedback. And a lot of times people are promoted to management because they're outstanding individual contributors to their jobs. And then they're thrown into the deep end and told to manage people. How do you? And so things like rumble language, coin method feedback, languages of appreciation, all of these can give incredible boosts to environments in organizational settings. So, and if anyone would like to talk about what that can look like on teams and or even maybe share a particular challenge that you might be dealing with and workshop it a little bit, we could set up a call for sure.
Oh, that's great. So I know we've got about 1 minute left. So I want to, there's a couple more questions that I'll just send to you via email. But I'd love for you just to kind of close this out, final thoughts, and then we'll give everybody their day.
Awesome. Well, I will say if anyone would like to stay on and chat, I can, although I want to be honored that some people might have a hard stop. But I think first and foremost, I want to say thank you so much for your time. I think that's one of the, especially during a busy holiday season, such a precious, precious commodity. So I appreciate everyone being here today. And thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tara. This was wonderful.